Donkey Kong Country had some great enemies, but Donkey Kong Country 2 really stepped up their game in a lot of ways. There's greater emphasis on consistency between the various Kremlings, uniting them under the Kremling crew banner. We see a lot of new faces, as well as a few old faces with new roles or improved designs. While there's not as many palette swapped enemies, and that's a shame, DKC2 more than makes up for it by having a greater all-round variety of Kremlings to fight. It's a pretty stellar cast, and I think it's high time we take a moment to celebrate them. This is part 48 of Overthinking Donkey Kong Country 2. You know the drill. All the bad guys, from least bestest to most bestest. A couple differences from last time. I'm including all cut enemies still found in the game's code as part of the main countdown. Mostly because, with them included, the total rounds up to a real schmick 50. And lastly, I had a real difficult time making this list, so I decided to just play it fast and loose with the rankings. They are more or less in order of worst to best, but I reckon there's probably more than a couple characters who got robbed. Okay, let's get on with it. I don't think there's a single enemy in this game that I don't like, but somebody's got to be at the bottom of the list, so Puffed Up gets the honor. I like having Puffed Up be our first entry, because as some of you know, he was originally slated for the first game, and can even be found in that game's code. So putting him here serves as a nice, if tenuous, bridge between the two. Something I just learned is the Puffed Up in DKC's code was actually a slightly different design. As far as I can tell, it's basically the same, save for its blue fins. He's a pufferfish. I think that's obvious. He's one of the only DKC2 enemies to show up in Donkey Kong 64, which I think is awesome. Any connection that game had to the DKC trilogy was a win in my book. There are three variations of Puffed Up: a greyish color, a warmer sort of brown, and a desaturated greyish green. Grey and green explode, shooting spikes in the compass directions and diagonally respectively, while the brown just inflates and deflates, creating a dynamic obstacle. I've lumped them all together because, despite playing the shit out of this game over the last 20 years, I only just learned there were even variations. I don't know if these guys were in the game's code, but they were planned for Donkey Kong Country at one stage, named after shurikens, which is a fancy way of saying ninja stars. Shuris spin through the water, bouncing off the walls. They're one of the biggest pains in the ass in the water levels, and I say that with the utmost respect. Shuri's another enemy that returns in Donkey Kong 64. I had totally forgotten, but that's fantastic. Not stoked on their 3D makeover though. Onto land for this next one. Spiny is a porcupine, not to be confused with an echidna or hedgehog, which, for an embarrassingly long time, I thought they were. Turns out porcupines are real animals, and honestly, they're kind of nightmare fuel. Like if a giant skunk got a hit of the T-virus or something. In their defense, they're actually quite cute in DKC2, and they fulfill a unique enemy niche. Just as Claptrap and Clampon can't be attacked from the front, Spiny can't be attacked from the back, or the top, for that matter. Not a big deal, but mistime your roll and you could be picking quills out of your face for the rest of the day. Anyway, Spiny is great. Don't let his placement on this list fool you. They're all great. Screech is actually a pretty cool enemy. He's so low on this list because he's a fucking ball twister to beat. Your only opponent in the race that is the second half of Screech's sprint. Screech is the absolute last line of defense between you and Captain K. Rool. He can't hurt you, but you can hurt yourself trying to beat him to the finish line. I said in the Screech's sprint episode that I've always seen him as the parrot to Captain K. Rool's shoulder, and while there's nothing to back that up, it just seems right to me. As for what kind of bird he is, maybe a palm cockatoo? I don't care. There's really not much difference between the two, but the pink Shuri just seems a little cooler to me. Instead of cartwheeling around the place like some sort of hyperactive child, the pink Shuri variant bides its time, waiting for On Guard or a Kong to swim past before making a precision strike. I was researching sea stars to make this episode a little more like the DKC version of this idea, but it just made me uncomfortable, so I stopped. I actually quite like the Flotsam enemies. There isn't much I can really say about them though. They're your generic water level obstacle, similar to Bite Size or say Chomps Jr. They suit the game's aesthetic and they're pretty cool, so they're a win in my book. I have an irrational hatred for these dudes, but that's because they used to freak me out as a kid. They're easy to avoid when you know the timing of their attacks, so they're not so bad. I love the concept of them, just another of the many great ideas DKC2 brought to the table. Seriously. They could have copy-pasted DKC with a new coat of paint, but they chose to add as many new ideas into DKC2 as the cartridge could hold, and it's a huge reason why this series exists almost 3 decades later. Lockjaw's loosely based on piranhas, though he doesn't really look like a piranha to me. Like the Flotsam, like Shuri, I feel like Lockjaw fits right into the game's aesthetic. Fuck, I love this game. The green Flotsam variant is much like the blue one, but will patrol back and forth as opposed to swimming in one direction. I'm gonna be completely honest with you all. Despite playing this game like once a year for the last 20 years, I never knew the difference between the two. It was probably super obvious too, but there you go. It's nice that I'm still learning new things about this game, even if they're stupid and meaningless things. Both Flotsams are stingrays, most noticeable for killing the single greatest man Australia has ever produced. Seriously, Steve Irwin should be on our $100 bill, instead of these stuffy looking assholes. The man was a legend, and like the Avatar, we need him now more than ever. As for what Stingray Flotsam is based on, it's a hard call for someone who knows little about them to make. The Flotsam itself is likely saltwater, but there's no reason its design has to be based on saltwater rays. They have spots like some river stingrays, though some of the saltwater rays also have spots, so that doesn't do us a lot of good. Their shape rules out some species, like the butterfly and eagle rays. If I had to take a guess, I'd say Flotsam most closely resembles the round stingrays. Seeing as how these little fuckers sting hundreds of beachgoers every year, I'd say that checks out. Mini Neki returns from Donkey Kong Country, with a revamped design and a new attack under their belt. Instead of puking nuts at the Kongs, they now swoop down, making them both dangerous and useful. Worth noting that they're now sometimes just referred to as Neki, having been promoted to the main vulture enemy in the original Neki's absence from DKC2, but they'll always be Mini Neki to me. Another enemy that was slated for the first game. I've said it before, but Click Clack is so much better utilized in the sequel. He suits the game more too. You could make the argument that Click Clack is this game's army because he needs to be jumped on twice to be taken out, but I don't think that's a really strong case. He's his own thing, and one of the many new and interesting enemy ideas introduced in DKC2. Click Clack can be picked up after being knocked on his back and thrown like a barrel, so there's that. I know next to nothing about beetles, but gun to my head, I'd say Click Clack is based off the generic scarab shape and given the pincers, mandibles, whatever they're called, of the stag beetle. Snapjaw only appears in 2 levels, but he definitely leaves an impression. He's also one of the only palette swapped enemies in the game. He looks like Lockjaw, but he aggressively pursues the Kongs as they do everything they can to stay out of the water. If they so much as dip a toe in, Snapjaw's on them like something on something. I don't know, I'm fucking exhausted, guys. Snapjaw paves the way for Nibbler in DKC3 as well. And while Nibbler seems a bit more individual, a bit more fleshed out, I think I still prefer Snapjaw. Might seem strange to have this guy, basically a part of the furniture, so high up the list, but what can I say? I just think he's cool. Technically, and very tenuously, a member of the Kremling cutthroats, Crockhead just vibes out. Swamp, lava, it doesn't matter. He doesn't attack the Kongs, and he doesn't get particularly butthurt when they use his face as a stepping stone. I don't give a shit about Cackle, but I should probably say something. He's a big skeleton Kremling whose only appearance is in Haunted Hall. Given his size, I think it's fair to assume he was an important Kremling during his lifetime. Whether he was a high-ranking member of the crew, or just a wrecking ball, we'll never know. They called that the Zinger. They don't let you use that no more. Zinger's a classic, one of the only enemies to return from DKC, and the only enemy to return more or less unchanged. Yeah, Zinger gets a sleeker design for DKC2, but like, I didn't actually notice the difference for like 20 years, so it can't be that different. I do miss the other colors, but it is what it is. Neek replaces Naughty as the most useless enemy in the game, but I love him for what he is. I like his design, I like his little squeaks. He makes a bit more sense in context, as mice can be expected on pirate ships and probably other places. I don't have anything else to say. Flitter's cool too, and serves as the replacement for the original Neki. She's an awesome dragonfly, and that's about all I've got. This is our first cut enemy on the list. Yellow Flotsam appears in the game's file somewhere, but never in the game itself. It's my guess that the yellow Flotsam would have had a unique movement pattern. Blue moves in one direction, green moves back and forth. Maybe yellow would move up and down, or in a set pattern. We'll never know. Following up the first cut enemy with the second. Purple Flitter looks great, but honestly not different enough from the Flitter we got to have anything to say about it. It'd be cool if the various Flitters found in the game's files had different movement patterns like the Zingers in DKC. The first new, regular addition to the Kremling crew on the list, Clubber's a wholly new enemy concept. He hides in barrels, and when you get close, lets loose the body snatcher's scream and charges. He can't hurt you, but he can knock you into someone or something that will. Is he annoying? Yeah, a little bit, but I still like him. He's got a great design, and I love what he and his variants bring to the table. He's replaced in DKC3 by the slower and less interesting Knocker, but he does appear more or less unchanged in DK64, so that's cool. The second of 2 Flotsams found in the game's files, but not in the game itself. Maybe like the Red Zinger, this Flotsam would have been invulnerable. Maybe it would follow you around like the Nemos from Donkey Kong Land. Like the yellow flotsam, we'll never know. Another cut enemy found in the game's files. This flitter is identical to the purple flitter, but its blue wings are now green. The green-purple color combo is always a good one. Maybe they were toying with the idea of having flitters with the same body color, and the color of their wings denoting their movement patterns or something. It's also possible that, right up until the 11th hour, they couldn't decide on what flitter to use, so all of them were in the game's files just in case. Just like the green variant, the brown or red crockhead hangs out in swamps, lava, just goofing off. The difference between the two is the brown one propels the Kongs upward, kinda like the tires from DKC. That's not why he's higher on the list. I just think he looks cooler. Kaboom is a red-skinned clobber who hides in TNT barrels. No points for guessing how that can go wrong. I feel like giving him his own name is a little unnecessary. To me, he's just a red clobber. Cat or motherfucking Ninetails. There is no enemy like him. Not in DKC, not in DKC2. Even his death croak is a unique sound. Though, looking at it now, it could very well be a pre-existing sound pitched down. Still, Cat or motherfucking Ninetails is awesome, and I love him, and he probably should be higher up on the list, but he's not, so suck it. Clank is this game's Crash, except he's cooler. He comes in 5 flavors: strawberry, blue heaven, orange, not quite ripe banana, and definitely not ripe banana. I'm lumping all 5 together because there's no actual difference between them besides color, and I feel like making 5 separate entries here is overkill. If I absolutely, positively had to rank them, from worst to best, yellow, green, blue, pink, orange. Yellow clobber differs from green clobber in that every time he bumps you, you lose a banana bunch. His color very tenuously tips the player off that they could stand to lose bananas. But like, it'd be unfair to expect any new players to figure that out without it happening to them first. He's in 19th place because he looks cool, nothing more. Yet another flitter variant. This isn't the best of the bunch, but it's second best. He looks more green to me, but whatever. I like him. It wouldn't surprise me if they were trying to figure out a way to make the flitters look iridescent. That would have been awesome. Just a cool little touch to the 5th boss fight. The ghost variant of Mini Neki feels oddly personal. Like these are the Nekis you killed on the way to saving DK. It'd be cool if they got more than one appearance, but it is what it is. They call that the Red Zinger. They don't let you use that no more. Red Zing is the first, and technically only new variant of Zinger in DKC2. Unlike in DKC, the color coding in DKC2 denotes whether a Zinger is invulnerable or not. The red ones are, the yellow are not. They look cool, and that's the only reason they're so high up. Grey Kaboing is an evolution of DKC's jumping critters, namely the blue critter. This is reflected in Kaboing's base appearance being taken from Clomp, this game's green critter equivalent, and altered. As I've said many times over, DKC2 really lifted their game with the enemies here, and Kaboing is a great example. Not content to slap a coat of paint on a pre-existing enemy, they created a brand new one instead. Something I didn't notice is apparently his retractable, bouncing peg legs are made out of spyglasses. Unconventional, but hey, if it works, right? While Kaboing is himself an evolution of the jumping critter variants, he paved the way for DKC3's recoil by having a personality all his own. They called that I'm not doing it for this one. Green Zingers in the game files, but not in the game itself. We got a green Zinger in the previous game, but here, I don't think movement would have been the thing to distinguish it from the other two. Maybe it was going to be like Screech and chase you through Ramby Rumble instead of King Zing. Maybe it was going to be like Nautilus from Donkey Kong Land and follow the player around. Or maybe it was just super fast. I don't know. Crook is awesome, and should probably be a bit higher up the list, but what are you gonna do? A new enemy, and one that has no connection to the older ones from DKC. Crook throws his hook hands that boomerang back to him. I don't think it's a stretch to say he's one of the harder enemies in the game. He's not as big as he looks, with the jacket he's wearing being a few sizes too big for him. In that sense, he's similar to Cloak, and maybe the two are connected in some way. He's probably, honestly, about the same size as a Clump. Crook is one of the only enemies to have a song named after him, so that's cool, I guess. Cutlass is another new enemy to DKC2, with no DKC equivalent. He fights with giant oversized cutlasses, hence the name, that he apparently ordered off of one of those late night infomercials. If that's the case, then it was the first and only infomercial in history where the product was actually good. He and Clank, like Critter and Crash, are basically one and the same. I really like Cutlass. I don't know why, but I have a soft spot for the not as big as their peers, but can compete with creativity and intelligence class of character. There's a joke about me in there somewhere, isn't there? It might seem strange that Clomp, this game's green critter and arguably the weakest Kremling in the game, He's so high up the list, but here we are. I think you can tell a lot about a game by its most common and basic of enemies, and Clump is about as cool as they come. Like the green critter before him, and like Cobble and Skitter after him, I think Clump is constantly overlooked and definitely underrated. One thing I love about Clump is how he's clearly just a critter after a graphical upgrade. Same general look and proportions, with a more interesting texture and a pirate outfit to boot. Cloak is awesome. One of the rare holdovers from DKC, Cloak is a ghost that hurls crates, barrels, chests, bananas, and sometimes enemies at the player. He looks awesome, brings a new dimension to the gameplay, and some other third thing. Unlike most enemies in the game, I feel Cloak gives us a huge insight into the story of Crocodile Isle, but that's something we've discussed already, and we'll talk about in more detail later. Also, as I'm wrapping this episode up, I just kinda noticed, Cloak could be this game's Mankey Kong. Even though his name sounds like Tampon, Clampon is one of my favorite enemies in the game. An evolution of Claptrap as seen in DKC, Clampon is slower, but much larger and more menacing. The entire reason he's so far up this list is his design. He looks incredible. Green Cutlass is just a faster version of the yellow variant, but he also looks real cool, that's all. Pink Cruncher is also just a faster version of the main Cruncher variant, though Pink Cruncher's speed is reserved for after he's attacked. I'll give Pink Cruncher a few more points for being this game's Grey Crusher equivalent, who was one of my favorite enemies in the original game. This guy is a real motherfucker. He looks terrifying, especially with the banshee wail that all clobbers let out, but when you factor in his life removing ability, he gets genuinely terrifying. First time I encountered the evil clobber as a kid, I was in disbelief. I know that sounds a bit extreme, but I don't know how else to explain it. I felt like this enemy was cheating somehow. Anyway, aside from being one of the most dangerous enemies in the game, if not the most dangerous enemy in the game, he's also one of the coolest. Red Flitter's the final unused enemy on this list. As for why he's so high up, I just think he looks cool. He may have functioned similar to the Red Zinger, which explains why he was cut. Why use two when one will do? Might seem a bit vanilla for the top 4, but I really like the Blue Cruncher. He's this game's Crusher, and the second in a long line of Kremling strongmen, continued by Crumple and Kasplat. He's got a lot more visual personality than his contemporaries, and even his peers in DKC2, looking like a roided up Venice Beach bodybuilder. And when he gets attacked, he turns red and spazzes the fuck out. Cruncher's a great enemy, and while he's been rendered more or less obsolete, I want to see him return. Oh yeah, despite looking quite different, it's been confirmed that Cruncher and Crusher are one and the same. The green Kaboing jumps higher than the grey Kaboing. Faster too, probably. Look, he's in third place because I think he looks cool. They called that the Klinger. They don't let you use that no more. Klinger's another new addition to the Kremling crew, and one with no equivalent before or after. Klinger's got so much visual personality that it's hard not to love him. He's good at his job, and he's clearly having tons of fun. He's no pushover either. Unless you've got a projectile, you're not going to come out on top if you meet him in the rigging. He's a cool looking Kremling that adds a lot to the game, and he's one of the standout enemies for me. Also, he's orange, and I just think that's awesome. The Slippers from Donkey Kong Land could have been a sort of prototype for Klinger, but we don't talk about them. Might seem weird to have Cannon in the number 1 spot, but I can't think of a single enemy that is more deserving. Cannon is Clump from DKC, given a pirate makeover and a fucking gun. He's equal parts enemy and obstacle, and is used in creative ways all throughout the game. His first appearance is a level named after him, and while I think it's a bit of a stretch, it could hint that Cannon might be a lot more significant to the story than the moment-to-moment gameplay lets on. He's got multiple animations, is constantly changing up his attacks to keep players on their toes, gives us yet another through line to DKC, and he's just fucking cool as fuck. I love Cannon, and if you don't love Cannon too, then I don't want to know you. Before we wrap this shit up, I want to spend a few seconds talking about Mr. X. As far as we know, Mr. X is the only enemy made for DKC2 that ultimately didn't make it into the game in some form or another. Among fans, the mystery behind Mr. X has taken on a life of its own, and he's become a sort of symbol for the darkness and mystery of the game itself, which is kind of funny when you think about how he was just the original Cackle. Still, some sources claim he was going to be a major antagonist in the game, and as we'll see later on, he's not the only Kremling that was planned for. Part 48 done. Sorry this one took so long, but if it's any consolation, it was hurting my brain, so I switched gears and worked on the final 50 episodes for a few days instead. If I'm being completely honest, I also caught up on sleep and played ukulele and Tropical Freeze. Had a bit of a health issue too that I'm still dealing with, but it shouldn't be a problem for much longer. So after the next episode, it'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming. As opposed to debating the order of the list, I'd like to hear what your favorite enemy is and why. I think that could be cool. One more detour, then we're on to the recap episodes before the final fight.